Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Artsbeat TV and Radio here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer, and we're going to spend some time chatting with Jerry Bryant, who specializes in maritime music. He's an American folk singer, an artist, and scholar, and I've always, for years, wanted to talk to Jerry Bryant about sea shanties and maritime music. And Jerry, this is a great opportunity. Welcome.
Thanks, Mark. As you may know, there is a bit of a shanty wave cresting right now, and I've waited 40 years for this to happen. So thank you for having me on.
Well, I mean, we've known each other for years, and your partner and I used to work together, and she would talk about the fact that you're going to do a music festival and sing sea shanties. And words beginning with S are difficult for me to pronounce without hissing. So I'm driving out here today, kept saying, repeating the words sea shanty and singing in the hopes that I could introduce you properly. How did you get involved in folk music and sea shanties?
Oh, way back in the dim past, I was a band musician, and that trumpet was my main instrument all through school. And but I realized when I hit high school, being president of the band and playing trumpet didn't get me girls the way the guitar did. So I had picked up a guitar along the way, and Simon and Garfunkel and James Taylor and all that stuff. And that was way more of a chick magnet than the trumpet. So that kind of led me into traditional instruments. And the real switch happened at Faneuil Hall. I was busking there one October day, and it was really cold. And I couldn't play my Paul Simon songs anymore on the guitar. It was just, my fingers weren't working. So I said, well, did I know anything I don't need an instrument for? And Drunken Sailor came to mind. You know, as one, we all learned that in school for some reason. I don't know why our teachers taught us that song, but they did. And so I started singing the few shanties I knew. Well, lo and behold, everybody started giving me money. I wasn't making any money off Sounds of Silence or, you know, the James Taylor stuff, but suddenly shanties were resonating with people back then. And I thought, I think I'm onto something. And so that led me even further down the path. And I just discovered this amazing art form that has existed for a couple of hundred years and is really, I don't know, I think it's an amazing window into the past of these men's lives.
So how did the shanty as a song come about?
They are very specific creations, and they were used as tools on board sailing ships. Because if you imagine, you know, you're on a ship and you're pulling on a rope, and there's 10 guys in the crew trying to raise this, you know, 2,000-pound sail and yard, and if they're just like, hey, come on, you know, if they are uncoordinated, it does not work very well. But if they learned, and the sailors took the idea from the call and response work songs of African-American slaves, basically. Because the slaves would work in the fields with call and response to coordinate their rhythms. And the sailors said, oh, we can do that too, because it really helped. There's a famous expression in sailing ship days that a shanty is worth one extra man on the rope. The coordination of the muscle power helped so much to get the work done more efficiently that it became a very popular tool. But sailors didn't sing them anywhere else except when they were doing the work.
So were these songs recorded or written down as you began to discover them? How did you find them?
Yeah, it took some digging back then before the internet. Lots of trips to libraries. For 100+ years, nobody in polite circles of society paid any attention to sailor songs because they often weren't very nice. They were kind of rude. But starting in the mid 1800s, as steamships were really starting to replace sailing ships, there were some people who said, well, wait a minute, these songs these sailors are singing are pretty interesting, and they're disappearing because sailing ships are going away. And so really in the early 20th century, there were serious musicians who began sitting down, finding old sailors, collecting their songs, and publishing books full of shanties. And so that was a prime resource for me. But I'll be honest that originally I learned most of the sea music from recordings of other artists. And at that time, there were more British artists singing this music than Americans. And so a lot of my early influences were British groups. And it took me years to not sing these with a British accent because that's how I was listening and learning. It was a bit of a challenge.
Now you perform shanties. Did they fall out of favor at a certain point, or have they just sort of been in the background?
Well, as I said, no one of any scholarly background paid any attention to them until the mid to late 1800s. And then there was this, what's been called the first shanty craze, which is in the 19 teens and 20s, because that's when several of the major collections occurred. folklorists started thinking, oh man, these are traditional folk songs that we should collect before they disappear. And so there were actually books produced in the 20s of nice piano arrangements for things like Drunken Sailor and Storm Along, and people would play them in their parlors. So that it became very popular in the teens and 20s of the 20th century. But then starting in the 1940s and 50s with the folk revival in England and the United States, thanks to the Kingston Trio and the Weavers and other groups like that, shanties became popular again. And so they, since the 50s and 60s, there's been a strong community of people into them. But TikTok has changed all of that, and now it's like all over the place.
Yeah. Were shanties specific to sailors of Great Britain and the British Isles, or did other sailing groups in other civilizations like the Chinese or the Portuguese that were or Japanese that were discovering the worlds and sailing to different ports, did they have their own versions?
Oh, that's such a good question. There are lots of scholarly debates about who gets to claim the shanty as their own cultural origin. The best scholarship seems to agree that true sea shanties, which were the sailor work songs, were a combination of African-American work song traditions, Irish singing, because there were a lot of Irish sailors in the early 1800s, and they have a real strong singing tradition in their culture. And then American and British sailors picked this stuff up along the way. But I think, we can give most of the credit for English language shanties to African-American singers with a healthy dose of Irish in there. But there were other cultures that did use shanties. Many of the European seafaring nations, France, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, they had some of their own shanties, but in truth, they actually adopted many of the English language ones, turned them into their own language. But other cultures around the world have traditions of work songs, fishermen songs, for example. I've heard one from Japan. It's a net hauling song. And so it serves the same function, but it wasn't used as a shanty on a ship to, move the anchor or raise the sails or things like that. So call and response work songs are pretty widely spread around the planet.
Who wrote these? Did somebody out in the field say, or on a ship say, "We need a new song today. I'm going to make one up"? How did they develop? And then who wrote them down?
I would love to meet some of the shanty writers. They are completely unknown. One of the things about many sailors in the 19th century, they were illiterate. So one of the most amazing things about this genre, Mark, is that these are often beautiful little works of art that were created by completely illiterate men. And so we don't really know who wrote any of them. They were never written down. They were in the sailors' heads until collectors came along. And the very first true collection of shanties wasn't published until 1888. And shanties had been sung for hundreds of years up until that point. So it was, they didn't get transcribed and written down until, the late 1800s at the beginning.
And they probably weren't recorded. When were the first recordings of them that came out?
Well, that's exactly right. It was, recording technology didn't really start until the very end of the 19th century. And that's when folk song collectors like, Cecil Sharp and Richard Runciman Terry and Joanna Colcord, who were going out. Oh, and the most famous American ones, John and Alan Lomax, they would use primitive recording machines to go out, and they found these old sailors. These were guys who were in their 70s and 80s. They had spent most of their lives at sea, but they were now retired. And these collectors went and found them in places like, there's a famous sailor home on Staten Island called Sailor's Snug Harbor. And that was a place that a lot of these men would retire to. And they would go there, the collectors would go there, record them, write down the words and try to figure out the tune they were singing, and then get published. So thanks to those collectors, we can sing shanties today, because otherwise they would have all disappeared.
Yeah, for sure. And were the shanties that one group sang similar to, like they sang on one ship similar to the ones they sang on another? Or did they have their own peculiarities based upon where they were, what ship they were on?
Well, one of the truths about shanties is that everyone has about 18 versions. And what that tells me as a folklorist is that somebody would hear a shanty, they'd hear, Joe sang this shanty while we worked out the capstan. Oh, I really like that one. But then he had to remember it. It wasn't written down. And so when he would go on his next trip on a different ship, he would remember it, but he might forget a couple of the words. So he changed them, or he'd add his own words. And so over time, all these different versions ended up in circulation. And so it was usually a standard refrain, because that's typically how shanties are classified, by the choruses, and then the verses. And the truth is that most of the verses were improvised by the shantyman. It was really the first freestyling. And over again, collectors talk about the fact that, I talked to this shantyman and he remembered 3 verses, but he said, I could sing 40 verses just by making them up as they went along. And that was a quality of a really good shantyman, was he was able to create verses on the fly.
Now, you're a scholar in terms of shanties, but you also perform quite a bit. Prior to the pandemic, where would you sing your songs?
Oh, yes, those golden days of yore.
Yeah.
I have had the privilege of being featured at the Mystic Seaport Sea Music Festival for years and years. They just had their 40th festival 2 years ago. And that is one of the prime spots in the world for going and hearing traditional shanties and actually, singing them on ships and using them. That's one of the things that the Mystic Festival does. It was the first time I had a chance to stand on a deck of a ship with a line in my hand, singing a shanty. And it's a whole lot different than singing in a coffee house, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah. One of the things that all of us learned as we got into this music and had a chance to try it out was like, oh, they didn't sing so fast as we do. You just can't, because you're working. The shantyman was a working sailor. It wasn't a special job. he just happened to have a good voice and he knew a bunch of songs. And so he would be called the Shanty Man, but he didn't get extra pay. He wasn't hired separately. He had to do the same kind of work. So it was maritime festivals. There are several of them that take place around the world. New England's a hotspot for shanty singing just because of our maritime heritage here. And one of my favorite things to do is to go to shanty sings, pubs and taverns, and even outdoors. Back in the pre-COVID days, we would gather and have a couple of pints and sing shanties for hours. And it's just a glorious thing to be in a group of 50 or 60 people all coming in on these big grand choruses and raising the roof. There's nothing else like it, in my opinion.
Jerry, we need to take a break to acknowledge underwriters, but before we do, I know you have a website and people want to learn more about Jerry Bryant. So why don't you tell us where we can find out more about you?
Oh, sure. It's my name, Jerry Bryant, with the word sings attached. So jerrybryantsings.com. You can read a little bit about the history of them. I've got a couple of CDs out. And yeah, it's a great way to kill a few minutes of idle time if you're looking for something to do.
Well, we're going to take a few minutes to acknowledge underwriters, and we'll be back to talk more with Jerry Bryant. You are listening to Artsbeat on 89.5 FM WSKB, or watching it on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15. If you've missed a portion of today's program or you want to catch some of the others, they're all archived on YouTube at WSKB Community Radio's YouTube page. I'm Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer, and we'll be right back.
Underwriting for WSKB's community radio programming is brought to you in part by R. Levesque Associates. They are offering landscape architecture, civil engineering, environmental permitting, and land surveying. RLA is a second-generation company devoted to excellence in the planning and design of outdoor spaces. On the web at rlaland.com or at 40 School Street in Westfield.
Support for community radio on WSKB provided by Westfield Electroplating. Employing over 140 skilled platers, painters, and technicians, Westfield Electroplating was founded in 1946 and was the first company in the country to achieve National Aerospace and Defense Contractor Program accreditation, proudly maintaining that status for over a decade. Westfield Electroplating provides over 50 quality finishes to meet your corrosion, cosmetic, or performance needs. On the web at www.westfieldplating.com or 413-568-3716. Westfield Electroplating, putting the finishing touches on technology.
This is Ken Stomsky from Ken's Den on WCPC 15 and 89.5 FM, Tuesdays, 8 to 10.
Community Radio, 89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM, WSKB, Westfield.
Welcome back to Artsbeat, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer, and we're chatting with the maritime musician, folk singer Jerry Bryant. At the end of the program, we're going to play one of his sea shanties from one of his albums. The song is called Spanish Ladies, so you'll want to stay tuned all the way through Artsbeat this morning to catch a glimpse of that. Jerry, besides sea shanties, what other kinds of music do you perform?
Well, I really have a deep love for what's known as traditional song, traditional folk music. And what that means is, the folk genre, as it's applied in general use, is very broad. It incorporates people like James Taylor, all the way to Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys and Celtic music. So my focus is a little narrower. And by traditional, one of the best definitions I heard is a traditional song is one that nobody wrote. And it's because people back before Thomas Edison really had to make up their own music. If they wanted to hear music, they had to make it themselves. And so songs have been around for probably as long as humans have been. And traditional music, traditional songs are those that people created for their own pleasure, and then they held on to. through a process called oral transmission. And that's one of the beauties of traditional song, is that you can think of the oral transmission as sort of a filtering process. So a song that wasn't good did not get passed on because people wouldn't bother to memorize it. But those that we still have today, that we still are singing, some of these songs are hundreds and hundreds of years old. They're still exciting and they're still hair-raising. And they've lasted because they were so good. People took the trouble to learn them and sing them and pass them on. And so that is my real delight in music, is traditional songs and then traditional instrumental music, like Celtic music, like old-time Appalachian music. Things like that is a real love as well.
Now, I know that people today continue to compose in the folk idiom. So some of the songs that you hear folk singers or people labeled such are singing are contemporary. They wrote them recently. Going back to the shanties, are people continuing to write them today, or primarily are they performing those that are from the past?
Well, that's a pointed question these days, because those of us who have been studying and singing true sailor work songs, aka shanties, for years, we are always quite definite in that, a shanty is a work song that sailors use. And so anything that is not that technically isn't a shanty. But today the word shanty is used to describe, it seems to be any song that has a good chorus, a call and response kind of thing, and is sung a cappella or with a minimum of instruments. People think of that as a shanty. And so in terms of real shanties being written, not really, because there aren't any sailors to do the work anymore. But there's lots and lots of great music still being composed in that idiom. And so there are wonderful songs being written even today that could be used by sailors as shanties if they wanted to.
It's funny because it's a kind of song that you would expect somebody to be singing solo, or maybe a group of people singing in a group, but it's not the kind of song that, like, you wouldn't expect to hear Jerry Bryant singing shanties with the Springfield Symphony Orchestra. It's a much more simple version of music, but yet the shanty style showed up in music for film and for theater down the road. I saw a clip a couple of days ago about Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel, that the recent revival of it, which was choreographed and directed by one of the major ballet choreographers working today, and took the song Blow High, Blow Low. It was performed and arranged as though it was a shanty and danced on a ship. And it felt like it was a top 40 song the way it was presented. So where do people find some of the shanty recordings besides yours?
Well, Spotify is the place to go these days to get a playlist. If you're familiar with Spotify, and I actually don't even subscribe, I probably should. I'm just old and stuck in my ways, but Fran does subscribe, so that gives me access.
Okay, that's good to know.
But one of the consequences of the Shanty craze that came out of TikTok recently is that there are tons and tons of playlists of great shanties and sea songs that have been put together by people on Spotify. So all you need to do is go on Spotify, type in sea shanty playlist, and you will have hours and hours and hours of music pop up that you can listen to. So that's a great place. Mystic Seaport has their store. They have a lot of recordings, some traditional old recordings, some of what we think of as revival performers like me, who got into this in the late 20th century, singing traditional songs. So there's a good amount of material that's out there that people can access. And it's just, I'm so pleased that people have discovered it, because it's such a vital genre and such energy and passion in it.
with the pandemic, and people getting vaccinated now and being able to go out more, do you think you'll be able to perform at some point later in the summer?
Well, I'm actually in negotiations right now with a little town in Maine called Wiscasset. And they are planning in August a schooner fest to bring sailing ships to the dock, and they want some shanties, and they found me. And so I'm hoping that come mid-August, I will be up on the coast of Maine singing shanties at the top of my lungs. I'm really clinging to that right now to pull me through.
Now, for many years, you had a day job, and then and singing was on the side. Now you've retired from the day job, and you can do the singing full time. Do you find yourself completely busy with projects? Are you glad that you can do this full time, or do you wish you had started 20 years ago?
Mark, I never regretted not doing music for a living, because I have many friends who do make their living from music, and it's work. It's a lot of work. I have never felt like it was a chore, because I had work over here and I did that, and that funded my music passion. And so, yeah, I'm doing a lot of online Zoom singing and presentations and stuff like that, but it's just not the same. And so I am hoping that as things open up, I will be busy singing sea songs and playing music.
Now, you've got a couple of records out. Do you plan to record more?
Yeah, one of my retirement projects is to put out another CD of my own material. I do write songs a bit, and my first recording, called The Ballad of Harvard and Samuelson, is there's several songs that I wrote in there in the genre. And so I've got more that I've written since then. I need to get those onto a recording for, posterity. And so that's a project that is in the works.
That's great. We're just about out of time, Jerry, but before we go, people can find your recordings. They can find background information on you as a musician. And Shanty, so you have a website, jerrybryantSings.com. Are you on social media as well?
I do have a Facebook page, but in terms of music, no. I should say I just started a YouTube channel called Shanty Talk, TALK, and it's a great coming together of my love of singing shanties with my understanding and studying about ships and maritime affairs, so that I spend time breaking down a shanty in each episode. Here's what the words mean, and here's how sailors used it, and here's why they did it this way. So folks who really want to geek out and get the deep background on these songs, go to the Shanty Talk YouTube channel that I've got up. I've got 2 episodes on so far, and I'm continuing to add more.
Well, I'm going right to YouTube after this. We finished taping programs today to check it out. We've been chatting with Jerry Bryant, the expert of sea shanties, the maritime musician. Jerry, thanks for joining us today.
Mark, it's been a real pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
Hope to get to see you soon. We're going to take a break to acknowledge our underwriters who make programming like Artsbeat possible. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach, and if you've missed a part of today's program, you can find it on WSKB Community Radio's YouTube page. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by Westfield Bank. For more than 160 years, Westfield Bank has been an important community presence and commercial leader in the Pioneer Valley, with convenient full banking services in Westfield, West Springfield, East Longmeadow, Agawam, Feeding Hills, Springfield, Southwick, as well as Enfield and Granby, Connecticut. Visit us on the web at westfieldbank.org.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by Bay State Dental. Comprehensive dentistry at 14 convenient locations in Springfield, Chicopee, Longmeadow, West Springfield, Belchertown, East Longmeadow, Ludlow, Northampton, Greenfield, and Wilbraham, as well as 29 Broad Street in Westfield. Bay State Dental makes it a priority to help you achieve and maintain the healthy smile you deserve. On the web at baystatedental.com.
Hi, this is Harry Rock, host of Rock on Westfield every fourth Wednesday at 8 a.m. Tune in for my view of this place I call home.
Community Radio 89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back, everyone, to Artsbeat TV and Radio. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Our guest for this half hour is Guy McLain, who is newly arrived at the Westfield Athenaeum. Many people may know him from the Quadrangle in Springfield, first at the Connecticut Valley Historical Museum, and subsequent to that, the Lyman and Mary Wood Museum of the History of Springfield. And now he's across the river right here in our hometown of Westfield. Good morning, Guy.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
So what got you to Westfield? I know that you had been in Springfield for a long time. I think our paths first crossed years ago at the Connecticut Valley Historical Museum. And I know subsequent to your leaving Springfield, you wrote a book, and now you're here in Westfield. What got you here?
Well, I was just so interested when the position opened as director of the Westfield Athenaeum. I was just so intrigued by it because the Athenaeum is such a unique institution. It's more than just a public library. It's a library with a history museum and with an art gallery. And I just found that intriguing because in addition to my pursuits in history, I had to, in doing exhibits and things like that, I've also been very involved with art in the region. And so to me, it just seemed like a perfect fit for me.
And it's the leading cultural institution in Westfield, but it draws people from outside. For people who don't know about the Westfield Athenaeum, give us a little perspective on what the services are, what kind of events you do, and things like that.
Yes. Well, the Athenaeum is really a unique institution. Westfield's very fortunate to have an institution like the Athenaeum, which is more than just a public library. Obviously, I think most people in Westfield in the area know the Athenaeum for the public library component, but that's only one of three components that make up the Athenaeum. The other two components are the History Museum. And there's a wonderful collection of artifacts and archives that the Athenaeum owns and puts on exhibit. And then there's a very active art gallery. So those are the three aspects that make up the Athenaeum. So it's very unique. Very few other cities have something like this, like what Westfield has.
And how long has it been around?
The Athenaeum goes back to the 1860s, which is quite interesting because public libraries in America really didn't start coming into the form that we know of them today until really the 1850s and 1860s. So Westfield was very much, on the forefront of the public library movement in America, and it's a great story in itself. The development of public libraries in America, before the mid-19th century, we didn't, cities and towns didn't have public libraries. I think, that's one of the things that's so nice is the development of the public library in the last really century and a half.
And the idea that the public library can survive in the day of internet and Google and all of that, where you can read online. You don't really need to, quote, go to the library, yet the library is essential in any community's cultural and academic life.
Yes, I think it is an interesting, many people have asked this question, what is the future of the public library in an age when we have ebooks and Google is available and this sort of thing. But I think one of the things that makes the library unique and is certainly Google, can't really replace the help of a well-trained professional librarian. And one of the things that's very unique about public libraries that's not available on the internet, not available through ebooks, is that you could come into a library, get help from professional librarians. You have access to collections, you have access to computers, And also public libraries now play a role in other areas, community services, providing help with resume writing, for instance, helping people get a job, programming. We offer all kinds of programs. So public libraries have become community centers, have become forums, places for people to expand their horizons, not just simply to Google to get a little piece of information. And I think that's what makes public libraries still very, very important, very, very unique, is that their ability to serve as a community center, a gathering place. One of the things that public libraries used to be referred to as the People's University. And I've always liked that. That's kind of gone out, not too many people are still using that phrase to describe libraries. But to me, I still like that. It's a place where anyone can come and learn and get help with whatever they need help with. And I think that's just a great service for the community.
Now, I would assume that the Athenaeum has had to pivot during the pandemic. Have you been able to remain open in a limited capacity? Have you shifted a lot of your programs online? How have you guys been able to survive the pandemic? And how are you able to keep funded when you don't have people walking in the door?
Yeah, well, the crisis, the pandemic crisis was a really difficult thing, not only for the Westfield Athenaeum, but for libraries across America. But it's interesting how through this tragedy, through this crisis that we faced, we actually developed some services that are actually very, very that have become very, very popular. Our Library to Go program was developed in response to the pandemic, and basically, Library to Go is a program where people can call us or go on the web. Ask for a book or a DVD or other services, even to have a copy of a document printed, something like that. The librarian helps them find the item they're looking for. Let's say someone is just looking for a novel, something very common. They can call to see if we have it. The librarian can identify it, have the book put aside for them, and then the person wanting that item can just come by, pick it up, right outside our door, and they're on their way. And this has actually become very popular. And what we realized is Library to Go services are something that I think will survive the pandemic. This is really the future of public libraries. This is the equivalent to a fast food drive-through, basically. But what the beauty of it is, it works very, very well. People can now order services, come by, and very quickly pick up the items they need or acquire the services that they needed in a very efficient manner. So I think this is something that's going to survive the pandemic and be something that people will use even as we open up. And so that's what we've been doing for quite a while, is offering Library to Go, which offers almost all services. That's the beauty of it, is even though people haven't been coming into the building because of the restrictions, people have been able to use almost every service that the library offered pre-pandemic. So I think that's been really good, and that's kind of how we've survived. Of course, it's very important to be able to come into the library. I mean, one of the things I love to do in a library is just browse the bookshelves. That's how I found a lot of books that I really wound up really enjoying. Is I just discovered it by looking through the shelves. So we definitely want the building to reopen, but I think Library to Go type services are going to become the future of the public library as we move forward out of the pandemic.
Do you think people, with people having to stay at home during the pandemic, that they read more, watched more vintage films that they were able to pick up from the library to watch? Did readership go up?
Yeah, this is another very interesting phenomenon. I've read several studies that indicate that people did start reading a lot more as they were in lockdown. Some estimates is that during the year of 2020, reading increased by 20% overall, which I just think is a phenomenal number. And we've certainly seen that in the services we've offered. In the month of January alone, we provided over 1,000 people services through the Library to Go, which is a clear indication that reading has definitely increased over the last year. And I just hope that as we reopen, that people continue to read at the same level. They don't drop back down from those levels. But I think that's been one of the kind of strange side products of the whole pandemic is people have been reading a lot more.
I would think so. How many people work at the Athenaeum, and what kind of budget do you operate on?
We have 23, currently we have 23 staff positions here. We will probably increase that number by 1 or 2 as we start to reopen. But currently we have 23 people, and our budget's a little over $1 million a year. And if you think about that in terms of the community as a whole, the costs of a public library, even though they are substantial, keeping the library going, keeping all the services available, it's really fairly inexpensive cost if you think about spread over the population of the city. 41,000 people in Westfield, approximately 41,000 residents in the city. That's not a big budget. So it's a great service at a fairly low cost is the way I always feel. Public libraries are one of the best bargains out there if you think about it in those terms.
Yeah. How did you discover Western Massachusetts? What brought you here initially?
Well, I was living in Germany and I wanted to go back to school to finish my education. And looking at schools to go back to, I chose the University of Massachusetts. And so I came back and went to UMass Amherst back in the early 80s, loved it there, really enjoyed it, loved Western Mass, and decided, and especially because my field of study was history and art history, New England's a great place to be for historians. Obviously, New England history goes back a lot further than other sections of the country. Really, there's like 4 centuries to work with New England history. And so to me, it seemed natural to stay in New England. And I loved Western Massachusetts. So I decided to stay right in this area after I finished my education at UMass.
Yeah, and what got you interested in history before you studied it?
Well, when I moved to Germany, I visited a town that was celebrating their 800th anniversary, and I was just so shocked by that. A town celebrating 800 years of history, and I was looking at a tower in the middle of the town. It was actually even older than the town. And it sparked this interest in me, how a community had developed over all those years and had prospered and thrived and dealt with all the different problems that happened. And I just felt like, to me, it seemed so interesting to look at that process. And that's what got me interested in studying history is actually being in Europe and seeing the much older history that Europe had. So when I came back to the United States, I started applying that same kind of thinking in the United States. And, New England is a great place to really look at change over time, how communities change. I mean, Westville's a great example. Westville started really as an agricultural community and then became a leading industrial city, producing all kinds of products, and then evolved in the 20th century into other areas. And to me, that whole process is very interesting to study.
You spent a lot of time at the Quadrangle in Springfield, specializing in the history of the 413, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
When you describe to somebody who's never been to Western Massachusetts, what is the historical significance of the Pioneer Valley and Westfield in the bigger picture of the world? Why would somebody be interested in Greater Springfield or Westfield?
Well, I think the key element that makes Western Massachusetts, New England and Western Massachusetts so significant is when the Industrial Revolution started to develop in America in the early 1800s. New England was really a center, and Western Massachusetts was especially known for the development of innovative products, which is so important in the Industrial Revolution. Interchangeable parts. One of the inventions at the Armory in Springfield was a lathe that was used to make firearms, to make rifles for the military. But the significance of that was that it became a major development in industrial products. So just the interchangeable part component is very, very important coming out of Springfield. But what happened was pretty soon all through the region, Westfield, Holyoke, Chicopee, other towns in the region, we started to see the development of very important products, inventions that became so important in American history. So, and then for us today, if anyone is interested in the Industrial Revolution, which of course is a very, very important development, we can't imagine the modern world without looking at what happened in the 1800s with the Industrial Revolution. Well, this area was, of course, a center of that. The tool industry, many of the tools we use today were actually invented or developed in Western Massachusetts. The monkey wrench, for instance, came out of this area. The list goes on and on and on of the major inventions that came out of this region. For instance, automobiles. We all drive automobiles today. Well, the very first automobile in America was invented in Springfield. Westfield cars were made in Westfield. Bikes, motorcycles were all products that came out of this region. So even though, some people might say, well, who cares about the local history of a town if you don't live in that town? Well, the significance of towns like Springfield, Westfield, Holyoke is that they produce products and inventions that are still used today and had a major impact on the development of American industry.
And these mills and factories imported labor from all over the world, which is one of the reasons why we have a Polish community, an Irish community, Italian community, French Canadian, and all of that, which makes our area kind of diverse.
Yes, the factory, and this really started in the 19th century. The factories that were starting to produce all these products that were coming out of the Industrial Revolution, the Westfield, Springfield, these towns, and Holyoke, certainly, these towns were drawing people from all over the world because they needed workers to work in the factories, to work in these industries. And many of these, the workers that came to this region, because this region, it wasn't just standard industrial products. Many of the products, many of the factories from this region were required highly skilled workers. So there was a real, this region became a magnet for people from around the world who could work and help develop these products.
That's great. Guy, we're going to take a quick break to acknowledge our underwriters that make programming like this possible on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. We're chatting with Guy McLain from the Westfield Athenaeum. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach, and we'll return shortly.
Support for community radio on WSKB is provided by Betts Plumbing and Heating Supply Company, an independent, family-owned wholesaler serving Westfield for over 50 years, specializing in plumbing, heating, and industrial piping supplies. On the web at bettsplumbing.com or at 14 Coleman Avenue in Westfield. Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Dunkin' Donut Shops of Westfield and the Sardinia family. It's nice to know that even as the world changes, Dunkin' Coffee remains the same at 7 convenient locations throughout Westfield. Underwriting for community radio on WSKB is brought to you in part by Rockies. Over 30 convenient locations throughout Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Florida. One of the nation's largest ACE dealers. Expertise and great product selection in paint, hardware, lawn and garden. That's Rockies. Rock solid service since 1926. On the web at rockies.com.
Hi, it's Bob Plass, and I have Wow, It's Tuesday, every Tuesday, 6 to 8. Wow, it's Tuesday.
Community Radio 89.5 WSKB.
I did it!
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM, WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to Artsbeat, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. We're here every Friday at 8 o'clock on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. If you've missed a part of today's program or you want to catch up on some of the other Artsbeat programs we've run over the last few years, you can find them on YouTube at WSKB Community Radio's YouTube page. So you can go back and catch some of these great moments that I've been so honored to have the opportunity to meet some wonderful people that are creative economy people in Western Massachusetts and beyond. Our guest this half hour is Guy McLain from the Westfield Athenaeum, who was formerly at the Quadrangle at the Connecticut Valley Historical Museum and the Lyman and Mary Wood Museum of Springfield History. Guy, I know that you wrote a book in between Springfield and Westfield. Tell me about the book.
Yes, well, one of the projects that I wanted when I left Springfield, and this is a project that I had been wanting to get to for quite a number of years, but just couldn't do it, just didn't have the time. But I decided I wanted to write a novel that was based on some of my experiences working in the museum field. One of the things that I noticed was that in working with artists, women artists, many times very talented, competent women artists weren't given the recognition that they deserved in their art. They were kind of put aside. Many times I would go to an art reception, and the male artists there would be given all the attention. The female artists were almost shunned to the side, and that really bothered me. So after I met an artist who currently lives in East Hampton, Massachusetts, and she told me a little bit about her story, what she had gone through in her career. I realized this is a story that kind of needs to be told. And first I was going to write an essay about it just to see if, maybe an arts magazine might be interested in a story about this, my experiences there. But I finally decided the best way to present this was through a novel where I could develop characters and elaborate on the story. So that's what inspired the project. And I thought, well, I would write this novel in a year, maybe a year and a half. It wound up taking me 3 years to write the novel, but it was a great project. I really enjoyed it. And hopefully it will bring attention to the difficulty that women artists have in getting the recognition that they deserve. And another component, I set the book in Texas in the early years. The main character, the woman artist, I had her grow up in Texas because another thing that I noticed, because I myself grew up in Texas, is that they're just we're very fortunate in New England. We have museums, we have great institutions like the Athenaeum, who are bringing culture to their communities. But in the western part of the United States, many cities larger than Springfield don't even have an art museum. And so it's very, very hard for artists to develop their craft because, of course, you need to study what other artists are doing. And that's very, very difficult. So that was another component of the story. So that was the idea. I felt like I just wanted to bring attention to the plight of women artists in America, especially.
Where do people find the novel and what's its name?
The novel is called Drawing Without an Eraser, and it's available on Amazon. You can also go to any independent bookstore and they can order the book for you as well. But it is available on Amazon either as an ebook or as in paperback there. And the title, Drawing Without an Eraser, is a reference to the fact that in life, many times we can't redo things. We live our lives and we can't, if we make a mistake or if things don't go well, we can't go back and redo. And so I use the analogy of drawing, but not using an eraser in your drawings.
Well, Guy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been a great opportunity for a lot of people here that have not met you to learn about your background and also that at the Westfield Athenaeum. And maybe when social distancing rules and regulations change, we used to take Artsbeat out on the road every once in a while and do a program from Berkshire Theater Group or Theater Works in Hartford. It would be fun down the road to be able to come and do a program from the steps of the Athenaeum.
I would love to see that. I think it would be a lot of fun, very enjoyable. And it would be a great place to do it, I think.
I think so too. We've been chatting with Guy McLain from the Westfield Athenaeum. It's one of the area cultural resources. It's more than a library. I hope all of our listeners and viewers will get a chance to visit if they haven't already. It's one of the things that makes Westfield special and more than just an exit on the Mass Pike. So this wraps up another edition of Artsbeat. We're going to end with one of Jerry Bryant's songs, Spanish Ladies. Join us next Friday at 8 o'clock on either Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 or 89.5 FM WSKB. Peter Coles has been our chief engineer. We've been broadcasting from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. We'll see you next Friday.
Farewell and adieu to you Spanish ladies, farewell and adieu to you ladies of Spain, for we've received orders to sail for old England. We hope in a short time to see yous again. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar all on the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly 'tis 35 leagues. We hove our ship to with a wind from southwest, boys. We hove our ship to for to strike soundings clear. It's 45 fathoms with a white sandy bottom. We squared our main yard and up channel did steer. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar all on the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly 'tis 35 leagues. Now the first land we sighted, it is called the Dudman. Next Ramshead off Plymouth, start Portland and White. We sailed on by Beachy, by Fairley and Dungeness, and we hove our ship to off the South Foreland Light. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar all on the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly 'tis 35 leagues. Then the signal was given for the Grand Fleet to anchor, and all in the Downs that night for to lie. Let go your shank painter, likewise your cat stopper. Haul up your clew garnets, let tacks and sheets fly. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar all on the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly 'tis 35 leagues. Now let every man drink off his full bumper, and let every man toss off his full glass. We'll sing and be jolly and drown melancholy, and here's to the health of each true-hearted lass. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar all on the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly 'tis 35 leagues.